That's kind of the feeling around the whole Thomas Frank tenure, really. It hasn't been good enough. The football hasn't been good enough. The results have been horrendous. And let's be honest, this is kind of one of the worst versions of Tottenham Hotspur really we've seen in years. It's like a broken version of Tottenham. How come every team that's out of form and hasn't won a game in donkey's months or so comes to Tottenham and can look like prime Barcelona?
NordVPN, cybersecurity built for every day.
Thomas Frank walks the plank. Welcome to an emergency episode of the Talking Tottenham podcast with myself, Ryan Taylor and Alasdair Gold. Talking Tottenham is sponsored by NordVPN. Ali, busy morning for yourself, surely.
Well, and you as well. Yeah, it's something that we probably expected was going to happen at some point. And despite Thomas Frank's defiance, really, last night, it just seemed madness if he was going to continue, really. And lo and behold, this morning we got the news that he's heading off. He has departed. Tottenham have severed ties with Thomas Frank, and 7.5 months or so experiment has come to an end. It was always coming, wasn't it?
It was, and I feel like there's been so many points over the past month or so, past few months really, where you thought that's the end of the line, but he lived to fight another day. But I just felt like last night, obviously we were both at the game, it did feel like the point of no return, and that 12-day window between last night's game and the North London derby on February 22nd ultimately gave the board something to seriously think about. And I think they were left with no other choice but to pull the trigger. A bit of a strange sort of sequence of events after the game, Ali, in the sense that we heard from Frank in his press conference, and I was stunned really at how confident he seemed to be that he would be staying on for the North London derby, given the severity of the situation, particularly after those chants from the South Stand for Mauricio Pochettino early in the second half. There was a few murmurs that there was a few chants at Old Trafford. You said you didn't hear them, didn't you? But last night they were very audible.
Yeah, and to be fair, I didn't hear them at the time, but I saw videos kind of playing back of pockets of fans definitely singing it. And we've heard it before, they have sung for him. And strangely enough, in his pre-match press conference, Thomas Frank had said, I understand why they chant and it's fully deserved. And it's like, okay, I know you've kind of got to be polite, but you are essentially giving them the massive green light. Not that they needed it, but just to sing even louder. It was a very strange end to the game, because obviously the game itself, people will be well aware that Spurs kind of got themselves back into it, immediately fell behind again 4 minutes later. And other than a late Mickey van der Ven chance, never really looked like getting back into the match. And the fans started leaving. The attendance was like just under 60,000, which was generous, I think, even what we saw earlier in the game. But as that second half was going on, they were just heading out into the night in North London, the drizzly rain, thinking, right, stuff this. And unfortunately, players can string passes together if they're working within a system and a setup that allows them to do that. So, got to the end of the game. All of us felt it was kind of inevitable it was going to happen. Then he had this very, defiant moment in the press conference where he told everyone he was certain he was going to be there in 11 days' time to face Arsenal. Then as we were typing all that up, you picked out his TNT Sports quotes, didn't you? What did he say to that? It was another very defiant one.
It was. I think what was happening was that he was being pressed quite... obviously difficult questions, which is hard after a defeat like that when the fans are singing you're going to get sacked in the morning. But he was asked effectively whether he felt his time was up now, and he said, I spoke to the owners yesterday, so on Monday, and effectively no. So there was obviously some sort of dialogue between Frank and the hierarchy before the Newcastle game. But obviously what he's not taking into consideration is the fact that this is another terrible defeat. And obviously Leeds had picked up a point at Stamford Bridge. At the time, West Ham were beating Manchester United, although Benjamin Sesko, of course, rescued a point for United, which actually proved to be quite significant, really, for Spurs, because they're now still 5 points ahead of West Ham when it could have been 3. But I'm not sure if any of you, or you, Ali, sorry, or the listeners have watched back the TNT interview, but he was sort of asked a few quite strong questions about what would you say to Tottenham supporters who don't want you in charge of the Arsenal game. And he answered kind of, very sort of typical of Thomas Frank, sort of calm. But actually, once the interview finished, he sort of stared at the reporter, and it was clear he was not happy with the line of questioning. And, we know probably better than anyone, you do in particular, that after these defeats, we do have to ask these, horrible questions. Yesterday's press conference was living proof of that. I mean, all of the questions was kind of centered largely around his future and a potential departure. But Frank, that's probably one of the only few times I've seen him kind of break character in recent weeks, where he sort of stared back at the reporter.
Yeah. No, I watched it back. He definitely, there was a lot of glaring going on. I would say he wasn't particularly prickly in our press conference afterwards, but yes, it is part of our job. We have to ask questions that, are going to get under the skin at times, and they're not going to be happy about it. I think I asked about the lack of attacking moves, which I said earlier. I also asked how come every team that's out of form and hasn't won a game in donkey's months or so comes to Tottenham and can look like prime Barcelona. They come and this is another team. Newcastle, go on, you got to tell me the stat now. I had to ask you for 3 times yesterday. What was their away record?
So Newcastle had won 10 of their previous 15 away Premier League matches.
2 of their previous 15.
2, sorry, yeah. 2.
Yeah, not 10. That would have been more dangerous.
10. 2, which is obviously a really poor record. Also, something that was quite telling, Ali, was Newcastle have dropped 19 points from winning positions, which is the most of any Premier League side. But of course, when they were ahead, they never really looked like surrendering the lead, which is totally sort of feeding into what you said about teams rocking up at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and just sort of escaping all of their recent woes and problems. I actually thought, in terms of the quality of the play in the first half, it was absolutely striking, really, that I think Newcastle had 9 corners inside the opening 30 minutes, and some of the combinations and the way they were sort of zipping the ball through the middle of the pitch and then out to that wide right flank. And then Spurs got the ball, and the first thought is to sort of pump it in behind and get Dominic Solanke to make these kind of 40, 50-yard sprints, which he does amazingly well, to be fair. He holds it up, he gets his body in. But by the time Solanke's got to the ball, even if he's outpaced the opposition defence, you look back and you've got players like Gallagher and Odebel, which are sort of 30 to 40 yards behind, having to make up the ground. So I totally agree with what you're saying. Tactically, it was chalk and cheese yesterday between Tottenham and Newcastle. And that was quite damning, really, given that supposedly Newcastle were a team sort of enduring their own sort of crisis.
I know. Honestly, Dr. Tottenham is a thing. It really is. It is. It's like 100%. They inject confidence into the veins of the opposition. They really do. That first half was disgraceful, really, because Spurs were the home team, looked like the away team, happy to get anything they could. They were holding on, backs to the wall. And you're kind of thinking, wait a minute. We were talking about the attacking talent Spurs were able to line up with. We were saying before the game, to be fair, the starting 11, despite the injuries, was a strong starting 11 overall, one that should be able to do the job. And they're up against a Newcastle side with a few injuries of their own. Didn't even have a recognised striker on the pitch. Yet they looked like every time they went forward, they were going to score. And like you say, the combinations, the triangles, the things that you just haven't really seen much of at Spurs this season. And I agree, pumping out is a surefire way of getting him injured. Just constantly doing it. It's fine every so often as an outlet, but come on, as your entire game plan. I just thought it was a really, really dreadful performance for Thomas Frank in just showing everyone. And, Vinay Venkatesh and Peter Charrington, the non-executive chairman, sitting up there, they're looking down right on this rubbish that was being served up. And yes, there was a little brief reaction in the second half, again sparked by a 19-year-old midfielder playing as a right back in Archie Gray. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah. If you're a team that needs a 19-year-old in that position to spark you, then, the problems are pretty widespread within the team. And they're looking down and watching this pretty awful. And also, why do Spurs only respond when they're behind? Is it because they have to abandon the more restrictive tactics and start playing with a bit of carefree abandon? And he kind of moaned after it still that they'd been too carefree and had conceded the goal. It's a bit like, well, they've got to go forward because there's nothing happening right now. And and lo and behold, we get to the final whistle. Thomas Frank comes down to us, speaks to TNT as well, declares that he's staying, he's going nowhere. Unfortunately for him, Venkatesham and Charrington up in the director's box had other ideas. And that night, Venkatesham and Johan Langer went to the Lewis family and recommended on behalf of the board that Thomas Frank be sacked. And that's what obviously we not woke up to, we were already working, but that's what some people might have woken up to this morning, the news that he'd gone. And to be fair, there's two aspects to this, two sides to it. One is that they gave him a hell of a lot of time, despite how awful the results were. 2 wins in 17 is dreadful in the Premier League. They haven't even won a game in the Premier League in 2026 yet, which is just insane. So there's that side. Has he been fully backed? That's another discussion. That's something that we could probably certainly argue in the transfer window. He wasn't towards the end of it. And you were talking about Bournemouth's new signing and the other players across January window that have done well. And it just beggars belief that Spurs couldn't find someone in an attacking position that could have helped Spurs. And obviously we've got Wilson Odebear we're going to talk about, looks to be that could be a season ender for him. They're just, whoever comes in now is kind of stuffed with a lot of the attacking missing players. So, I do think time-wise they gave him probably more so than many felt he should have deserved. Backing, perhaps not as much. But I understand the fans. If Pochettino, who we'll talk about in a little bit later on, got sacked with 5.5 years worth of credit, just having reached the Champions League final, a historic one for Spurs they'd never been to before, and yet a few months later he was sacked. What had Thomas Frank done to kind of get that amount of time? I think there's, of course, the whole stick or twist thing that Tottenham, yes, they've been guilty of twisting constantly and never sticking with one manager, but it just didn't feel like the manager you're stuck with. There's been quite a few times Spurs have sacked managers, and I've been annoyed about it. I feel like they've just given up a little bit early and things like that. I can't say the same about Thomas Frank. There were no signs it was going anywhere, were there?
There wasn't. And I feel like that's the kind of frustrating element for me, that if we could all see that this wasn't going to lead to success ultimately, and, we could establish that from fairly early in Frank's tenure, why couldn't the Spurs hierarchy see that? I mean, I get that Vinay is someone who obviously reaped the rewards of keeping Mikel Arteta on that club down the road, not the A word. But with Frank, you could never actually see that. I could never actually establish the game plan, what Spurs were trying to do. I think a lot of his comments, with all due respect to him, I think I've sat in press conferences, as I've said, in Tottenham matches this season, and I just totally disagree with Frank's observations and assessments of the game. So I think it was pretty clear fairly early on that Frank wasn't the right man for Tottenham, and obviously that is a concern because of the processes the club have in identifying, managerial targets, and also the decision to actually part company with Ange for Frank was supposed to be, a significant one that basically helps the club fulfill the potential following continental success. So it's been a catastrophic disaster. And I think Spurs now need to learn from that mistake and make sure the next appointment is certainly the right fit. And that's what makes it interesting, really, for me, Ali, the timing and also the desperation of the fact that, they're only 5 points clear of 18th at this moment in time. There's a few tricky fixtures coming up, not least the North London derby. Spurs go to Anfield as well, and there's a few fixtures against teams in in similar positions to them. Nottingham Forest at home is a matter of weeks away now. So it's difficult, because my other argument is, you look at this squad now, 12 players currently are unavailable, 11 through injury with Wilson's knee issue, 12 with obviously Cooty's suspension. But who in their right mind is going to want to step into this mess at the moment, knowing full well the potential ramifications of the club's availability crisis, effectively, and the raft of injuries that they have, the lack of investment in January? It's a risk, and it's a poison chalice as well, to an extent. So that's my biggest concern right now, is that Spurs need results, but actually, who are they actually going to get in?
I think
maybe that's a negative way of looking at it, because technically things can only get better, but that's my concern.
It's a tough gig. No, I think you're right. It's a tough gig, and it's a tough time with so few players available. Absolutely. And I do think, though, there's ego involved in managers. Every manager thinks they can do better. I think that's the way it works. And also, Spurs got a last 16 Champions League tie, on offer to whoever wants to take this on. And I mean, I think the key will be getting the players back on side. That's what I feel, even maybe more so than the fan reaction, which I don't think he was ever going to turn around. But he was kind of had lost confidence of the dressing room. I think that was the key thing for Thomas Frank. He had this kind of way of talking, a dialogue with the squad, which I have known other managers to act like this. So it's not entirely unusual, but I think it was maybe just a surprise with the way that Thomas Frank comes across, is that he would have this way of, he would mainly talk with a select group of kind of the core leader players. And that meant there was a lot of like younger players and other quite talented players who would go days on end without hearing anything from him individually, just speaking to him on like a one-to-one basis, just even on the training ground and things like that. He would, obviously speak to the group and everything, but he would mainly converse through the main leaders. And that's all well and good if things are going well and you're cascading all the information through the group like that. But when things go badly and you start to lose the leaders, you're done. You're done, because the other players don't really know where they stand. They've got no real idea whether they're playing one week. We saw a lot of players that would be in and out of that team, and there'd be no real reason why.
Yeah,
and maybe they weren't finding out why themselves. And it's when the leaders start to doubt you, then essentially the beginning of the end. And I don't think the environment inside the kind of the dressing room towards the end was that great either. But look, I'm very loath to say that's purely about Thomas Frank. Oh, it's all his fault. What a terrible man, kind of thing. Because every club where things start to go wrong, that's how it happens. There's always communication issues. There's always kind of people talking behind backs and stuff like that. And as he said himself, the finger's always pointed at the manager or the head coach. So whoever comes in has got to immediately get everyone back together, somehow raise confidence ahead of probably the toughest game they could have as a first game. And also, you've got to, and some might say this is the wrong thing, but it's true, unfortunately. They've got to come in and have the respect to the players. That's going to be a massive thing. Question for you. I don't think they did, but do you think the players ever truly respected Thomas Frank?
That's a tough question. I mean, it seems a lifetime ago now, but when I think back to August when we were both in Udine, I mean, I saw something in Thomas Frank that suggested to me actually he could really drive this Tottenham team on. Tactically very good. I think he spoke in the press conference after, Ali, about this special operation, and it was all kind of sort of really enlightening stuff. And actually, when you listen to him, he spoke with conviction about his ideas and what he wanted to do with the group. And he had obviously dropped Basuma as well, so that authority was initially there. But I think just as the weeks went on, it was clear it wasn't. I mean, the incident post-Chelsea with Mickey van der Ven and Jed Spence, yes, it was papered over pretty quickly, and both players apologised. But I think that was an indicator of maybe kind of the dynamics within the dressing room and how Frank was perceived. The other sagas were obviously Cooties' disciplinary issues and statements, because, I mean, for me personally, I think that was an indication that Frank was probably a little bit scared of Romero. And I mean that respectfully, in the sense that Romero, as you were talking about in previous episodes, has such an influence on the Tottenham squad. He's the type of character that you don't want to upset. And if you risk upsetting him, there could be a knock-on effect that ripples around the dressing room. Key players, maybe sort of the tide turning against Thomas Frank. So I think he done his best to keep Cootie on side. And I think generally he probably did that, because he never once came out and hammered him. He was always very much giving Romero the benefit of the doubt. Whereas in my view, elite managers maybe would have disciplined Romero and sort of given him a little bit of a telling off maybe in the public eye. I mean, you think of great elite managers like Sir Alex Ferguson and Jurgen Klopp, Pep Guardiola. I think them sort of characters, I mean, it's hard to compare Thomas Frank to those, but I just think they would have maybe handled that a little bit differently and got a tune out of Romero, maybe to not clean up his act, because I always think he's going to have that fire and ferocity in his game. But I just think speaking out against a club like that is not a good look for all the captains. So I think by the end of Frank's tenure, it was pretty clear that he had lost the authority, if he ever had it truly. I mean, you look at Ange last season and, despite the domestic struggles, it was clear all the players were absolutely on board with... He had authority and he had that aura, whereas Frank never quite had that. He was always kind of, even the Arsenal Cup gate, that to me was another example of a moment where he lost that kind of respect, I suppose, is the plainest way to put it.
Yeah, I think I was trying to think of the right ways to say this without saying bad words that I can't say.
I know, it's hard.
But essentially, I think a lot of those players won a trophy, many of them winning a trophy for the first time, and they became, I can't use the word Billy Big that I would normally use, but they suddenly... What's that?
Entitled?
That'll do,
Yeah.
rather than the third word in that phrase that most people will know what it is. I think there was a little bit of a, we're pretty good, we are, kind of ignoring everything else that had happened in the season. And I felt like that was my one fear way back in the summer, that with Thomas Frank, was that he was coming in with no trophies on his CV, no playing career to speak of. That's not essential, but I think coming in with a little bit of a background of success and everything, they've just been used to a guy who, whatever people think of him, won titles or trophies everywhere he went, declared he was going to win a trophy at Tottenham, and despite all of the odds, managed to do it, the first time in 17 years. So they'd come off a guy that would promise them the world and gave it to them. So coming to this guy, he was going to have to absolutely smash it from the start. And I don't feel like he ever truly convinced them all. And it's a shame, because, I know people don't want to hear it because it doesn't really matter to them, but he was a good guy and he was a nice guy. And it's a shame that, it didn't work out for him, but ultimately, it wasn't good enough. It just wouldn't. It wasn't. His football wasn't good enough. I take the injury list absolutely, because if Postecoglou had the same problems and he was given that as an excuse, certainly for a long period of the season, then yes, that should be applied to him. But I would say in Postecoglou's case, he was playing with like Ben Davis and Archie Gray as his centre-backs. Matisse Tell was coming in and was playing as the lone striker because they had no one else. They had hardly any playmakers at times in the squad. Whereas I feel like Thomas Frank has at least had in key positions most of the main men, or not the main men, but people to get the job done. Yes, of course, he's had no Madison, no Kulusevski, Solanke for the start of the season, but nothing's improved really, other than in Europe since since Solanke came back as well. So I absolutely agree with him. He's had horrendous injury problems as well, which is a wider thing that Spurs need to sort out. But I still feel like he had the players to get the job done, and the football didn't reflect the players he had. And I do feel like someone else can cut. I think that's the key thing. They're at a point where would a change make them worse? No. And as soon as that becomes a scenario, then it seems a bit daft not to try something, especially when you're 5 points off the drop zone and journalists in the press conference room waiting for him to come in and go, Sesko scored, yay! It's kind of like, thank goodness for that. Otherwise, it'd have been 3 points in the drop zone, which is a ridiculous situation to be in. Crazy.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that is the thing. I think last night was the first time that everyone has genuinely sort of accepted that Spurs can't be out of the conversation where relegation is concerned right now. And I think when it hits that point, I mean, the manager is the only thing you can actually change mid-season. You can change the personnel and the tactics, but in terms of actually removing someone from the situation, that's the only reasonable sort of stand you can take to try and turn the fortunes around. So I think ultimately it was absolutely the correct thing to do, and it's been a long time coming because it just can't seemingly get any worse than this. Ali, we're going to have to do a little break, but after that, we're going to delve into who might come next. There's a lot of big questions that we need to answer about Poch and some of the other names that have been thrown into the mix. So do you want to tell us the benefits of NordVPN?
Of course. I was going to kind of go down a route of saying,
I know what route you were going to go down.
I know. I was going to think maybe Thomas Frank just needs a holiday and get away from it all. And I think it's probably not the right way to go right now. I think we'll just leave Thomas Frank alone, quite frankly.
Yeah.
He can do whatever he wants next. But certainly Tottenham fans might want to get away from it all at the moment, away from the threat of relegation and another manager going out the door and all of the other kind of misery, unfortunately, that seems to come with this football club. They're a crazy football club. They can be a club that deliver the highest highs and the lowest lows in a Premier League context, of course. So you might want to get away, and if you do, NordVPN have got you back because they've got a service which allows you to do everything you would normally do at home while you're abroad. They've got a brilliant product called SACKED as well, which I've used so many times, which gives you data abroad, and it's so much cheaper than using your mobile network provider as well. It's a fantastic thing. I've used that probably, I'd say, even more so than the Nord stuff abroad, just purely because it's a great product and you can use it in various different continents around the world to have really cheap data when you're out and about. But yeah, Nord itself, also something I use on work trips, personal trips, allows you to make your device think it's back in the UK, or flip side, if you're in the UK, you might want to make your device think it's somewhere abroad. So you might want to book, I don't know, hotel rooms, flights, concert tickets from a destination country rather than the one you're currently in, and you can make your device think it's there, and you might get it cheaper. Allows you to watch various things from other countries that you wouldn't normally get if you weren't using a VPN. Yeah, it's terrific. It gives you privacy online. It protects your data while you're traveling abroad. And it's got NordVPN threat protection feature, where it protects you from viruses and malware and all that kind of horrible stuff you can get off public Wi-Fi. And it is the fastest VPN in the world. That means no buffering, no lagging, and you can stream your favorite shows from anywhere in the world without your bandwidth throttling. In essence, you get premium cybersecurity for the price of a cup of coffee per month. And one NordVPN account can be used up to 10 different devices. We've got a great deal off NordVPN plan if you're going to look to do that. If you go to NordVPN.com/talking Tottenham, the link will give you 4 extra months on a 2-year plan, and there's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link, in case you missed it, is in the episode description box. I must apologise for the way that I'm reading out and saying stuff today. As Ryan knows, I started to get really rough and ill in the second half of the game. Tottenham quite literally made me ill. And I got out of the press conference. I was just snot everywhere. It was a horrible sight. So today, I might sound a little bit snotty and stumbling over my words, and that's why. But we crack on. We got to work. There's big things afoot at Tottenham Hotspur.
Fantastic, Ali. Thank you. Can I just say as well, I mean, since I've been covering Spurs sort of more consistently, I always covered them, but I'm doing a lot more Spurs this season. And I know you've always said that, it is an incredible football club in terms of, some of the stories and the turn of events. Genuinely, this season, in the past few weeks, it's been absolutely mad to see how much stuff can go wrong. Like genuinely, some of the stuff that's happened, I think, over the past couple of months, it's unprecedented, really. And it's just like, you do wonder what could happen next. But we've got to talk about what might happen next, because obviously at this moment in time, we don't know who's going to be in charge for the North London derby. Strong suggestions that maybe Johnny Heitinger might steady the ship from here on in. But Ali, what's the kind of noise or feeling that you're getting at the moment? Do you think Spurs go down the interim route, or do you think they maybe put the feelers out for a permanent boss immediately?
Not that they would care what I think, but I think they would be mad not to go for an interim boss right now. I think the current market of managers is not strong enough or wide enough, whereas in the summer, there are managers galore that you can look at.
Yeah.
They may decide, stuff that, we've decided we want this person as our long-term, manager. It may be someone, I don't know, they may go back to their original list. Remember, this is the big thing as well. Their selection process for Thomas Frank is hugely in doubt now. It really is. 30 strong list originally, 10 criteria that they had to go through. Do they trust their own data anymore? Because it produced a manager who failed, quite frankly. Yeah. But I do, from what I understand, one of the other names in the top four was Andoni Iraola, who I think people might remember from the time. He was my top choice among the bunch. But do you get him now from Bournemouth? I would say it's incredibly unlikely that he would be able to leave in February. You never know if Spurs were able to offer enough money and he wanted to jump across to a team sitting 16th in the Premier League right now, which is a scary thing, no doubt. But yeah, it's he would be, personally for me, would be a strong candidate. But again, one of the ones that's probably in the summer. I mean, there is a new name in the mix now after another, I don't know if we call it a sacking, a parting of the ways, a mutual thing, as always seems to be the case with this chap. Roberto De Zerbi is on the market. Your thoughts?
I actually covered a lot of De Zerbi's Brighton 2 seasons ago when they were in the Europa League. I went to Marseille, watched them draw 2-2 there. There was a few good nights actually at the Amex when they beat the likes of Ajax, and I think they went toe-to-toe with Roma. So the football was really good, and it was exciting. But my main concern is that with Roberto De Zerbi, it always seems to end in tears. He's had a lot of strong sort of incidents involving players sort of being totally removed and kicked out of his squad and been told to find new clubs. I actually remember when he froze Leandro Trossard out of his squad because Trossard was keen to sort of explore his options. Also this season, I think it was earlier in the season, Rabiot and Jonathan Rowe sort of had a training ground clash, and De Zerbi just banished them both, told them to find new clubs. And also the problems with the hierarchy as well. I think at Brighton, his main concern was the fact Brighton obviously had their model of signing younger players and he wanted more experience. At Marseille, I think there's been a little bit of frustration with, I think I was reading kind of the problem was that the expectations had kind of gone too high too quickly because they'd signed players of sort of, decent and respectable Champions League caliber that immediately they were sort of expected to dethrone PSG, which is, of course, difficult for any team really in France. So, yeah, that would be my main concern, just that, he's a manager that's not afraid to speak out against the club's powers that be. And I think ultimately we saw with Antonio Conte that never ends well. He's actually, you mentioned it, Ali, off air, but he is a little bit like Conte, but without the actual silverware to go with it. I think outside of
tell
maybe
everyone that.
a
No, I
Ukrainian
was
cup.
going to say that anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. He is like throwing a grenade into a dressing room. He really is. I think short term it would make sense. If you were to say to me, would you take him as an interim boss? I'd probably say yes. But there's no way on earth, surely, that he would agree to be an interim boss in any shape or form. I think short-term bounce you would get from him and some good football, energetic football. It would be lovely to watch. I think the Spurs fans would love it. I think come the summer, you would start to get problems. I think you would start to get, I wanted this transfer, it didn't happen and all that. And look, some fans may say, that's great. That's what they need. Shake them up. I'm sorry. If Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte couldn't shake up the club to get what they wanted, there is no way on earth Roberto De Zerbi is doing it. And yeah, I think we'd find ourselves in this situation probably around this time next season, talking about who the next Tottenham manager is.
Yeah.
So I like his football.
The shelf life is short, isn't it?
Yeah, I just think he would be... Spurs need someone to stabilise the club, not destabilise it. And I just feel like that's the opposite of what he does in clubs. I think he definitely provokes reactions and he gets good reactions at times, but the way he operates doesn't work with everyone. I mean, interims, let's think of interims. So yeah, Heitinger's obviously a shout. We haven't had the announcement as of yet, recording this, that anyone else has left with Thomas Frank. I'm sure that's all being negotiated at this current point in time. It's a weird little bit of time because obviously, like you said, 11 days to the match. They've got, I think it's 5 days off. I think I've got a feeling it was maybe earned because of the Champions League qualification. I think as soon as they knew they'd got that, it was a bit of a reward. Here you go. You can have an extended stretch of time, rest yourself, recover. And then we come in and you've still got almost a week's worth of training to get ready. And actually, what it's ended up doing is giving Spurs breathing space to find someone. So Heitinger is a potential one. Look, he had a decent caretaker spell at Ajax, permanent spell, not so great. Cool. Ryan Mason is back in the world of availability again. I personally think that I don't know if that works a third time. I don't think it's a great move for Ryan Mason, and I'm not sure Spurs would kind of see that as a great idea. I think he did solid jobs the last couple of occasions he did it, but he was also having Harry Kane up front for him and things like that. You know, it was probably a stronger squad then to work with. Matt Wells would have been a good shout had he not headed off to Colorado Rapids. I'm going to ask you this before I give my opinion on it. What do you think of former older managers potentially coming back, like Harry Redknapp, Glenn Hoddle, Tim Sherwood?
It's difficult because in my personal opinion, I think football has moved on from that kind of era of sort of these old school managers, the likes of, Harry Redknapp's a prime example, really. I mean, what he achieved in his managerial career was very, very respectable. And yes, he would absolutely galvanise the fan base. And at the same time, you would look at it and sort of whoever you support, there would be a degree of fascination there just to see how he would fare. It'd be very entertaining. I just think tactically the game is it's really moved on now in terms of shape, in terms of even how far the players run during a match. I think nowadays it's more about the physical elements of the game than sometimes the tactical side of it. So I just can't imagine, with the greatest of respect, sort of Harry Redknapp rocking up at Hotspur Way and leading a training session now. I know, obviously, he's vastly experienced, but I do think maybe it needs to go down the route. I don't know, though, because, you know, sometimes a manager like that can actually make everyone sit up and sort of, there's a level of respect there where some of these younger guys sometimes, like you say, with the egos of some of the players, not necessarily at Tottenham, but just within the game, sometimes they think they know more than some of these younger coaches who maybe didn't have the greatest playing careers. So I think that is an interesting question. I think Tim Sherwood definitely not. I mean, again, with all due respect to Tim Sherwood, I think my kind of level of appreciation for him somewhat died a death when he was on Soccer Saturday and he thought a team won a penalty when it was actually a defender committing a foul and winning a free kick in his own box. I just thought that was something that
I feel you've held that against him for a while.
I know, but I'm sure if anyone listening to the pod has seen it, they'll know what I mean. But it was a little bit kind of like, come on. He's a bit of a walking meme. Obviously, he did, he's managed the club before, but I just don't see that one really working either. I mean, Robbie Keane, I know I've talked about him before. That would be one as an interim that I think would have been good, but obviously he's just signed a new deal with Ferencvaros and he's going to stay. I think ultimately it does need to be an interim before you consider some of these big names. I mean, we've touched upon De Zerbi and Iraola, but actually, Ali, I think Spurs need to be shooting for the stars and going for not Ruben Amorim, the likes of Xabi Alonso and Maresca. And I know there's probably a very, very outside chance that they could even turn either of their heads. But I think that needs to be the benchmark and the aspirations. And then below that, maybe the likes of Oliver Glasner come into play. And Iraola, I totally agree. He's going to be available in the summer. And I don't really see who else might be in for him. I know it's been reported that Crystal Palace would like to bring him in, but I think that's a little bit of a sideways move from Bournemouth where he's got that infrastructure. So I think Spurs would be of great appeal to him.
Do you know something that we're also going to have a busy day tomorrow with?
Go on.
Just literally coming out as we're doing this. Ange Postecoglou recorded an episode of The Overlap today.
Oh, wow.
Just after the news broke about Thomas Frank as well.
God.
So that's going to keep it. I think it comes out tomorrow. That is going to be a busy day of transcribing. And oh my goodness, talk about fair play to them. If you're going to book a guest, and that's I saw he was doing a lecture in Norway.
Yeah. I had a little look into that. It was because he's part of the UEFA panel because he won the Europa League last year. So, Ange, one of the best speakers about in terms of press conference lines as a journalist when you're looking for something to write in terms of filling pages and back pages, nobody better. And that was the real kind of difference between Ange and Frank, really, that, when you try transcribe Thomas Frank's press conferences, there's a lot of kind of waffle at times. And I mean that as respectfully as possible.
Ange, interim boss?
Oh, mate, get him back on a perm.
Oh, wow.
Let's run it back.
Going very quickly back to the former managers thing. Look,
yes,
I know there's a lot of Spurs fans would love to see the likes of Harry Redknapp given another go. What I would say is, and with all due respect to Harry Redknapp, because his team played some lovely football with Spurs side, his recent experience has been pretty much non-existent for a long time in football. I mean,
was it Birmingham? Was that his last job?
Was he Jordan boss?
Yeah,
boss
something
of the national
like that.
team. I know he was on I'm a Celebrity. I mean, certainly I remember he was on that. He was good. He was very good in that as well.
Good tactician, was he?
Yeah, but I would say I mean, look, people could point to Martin O'Neill at Celtic and say, look, he's come back and done a really good job, but
it's a different job, isn't it?
Oh, it is. I've seen some suggestions of a bit of a dynamic duo of him maybe and someone like Jermaine Defoe, a younger coach. Look, who knows what they're going to go for. Personally, if we're going to look back, that's probably not the looking back that I would do personally. Either him or Tim Sherwood, as much as they've thrown themselves at the potential of it, give us a call. Essentially, I think both of them have said today. I think interim-wise, I'm not kind of completely averse to the idea of Robbie Keane. He's done well. I would say I don't know why he would.
Yeah, he would
take a full-time job and go to an interim job. Temporarily till the end of the season, unless he felt like he could. Truly believed in himself that he could earn the job full time. But again, it's a gamble. This is the problem is what do you do now? Do you go for another gamble when I think that's the whole point? I thought Thomas Frank was a safe pair of hands because his Premier League experience and everything. It actually ended up being anything but a safe pair of hands. It just didn't work at all. So they know that they've got to get the next one right because Vinay Venkatesham, CEO in his first kind of year at the club, his first real move was a mistake getting in Thomas Frank. I know he was part of the process with that, and Daniel Levy as well back then too, but still, it's the first thing under his watch and it's gone wrong. He's already had to sack a manager despite being someone that is preaching patience. So yeah, I do wonder if Paratici had been around, the very different names would have seen linked. Although I think De Zerbi was one that he really liked, so I'd imagine he would have shock horror. He's Italian. Who would have thought? But I mean, Xavi's out there, of course, not the player Xavi, the manager Xavi. I think we've said this before. I think he's a gamble. I do. I think there's a potential for him to be terrific. Don't get me wrong, but I think someone that hasn't really had much experience outside the Barcelona bubble, as you said yourself, you've only been covering Spurs are really concentrated in recent months and seen what an absolute crazy club it is. It's a strange one to parachute in from a bigger club into. I think Alonso, if we're looking like longer term, actually let's go to you with this longer term. Who are the potential candidates you think that if you were Spurs you'd be looking at in the summer if they get to the summer and are still a Premier League club, of course?
Alonso, definitely. I mean, how realistic that is, I don't know, because again, there's a chance that Pep Guardiola might leave Manchester City. We don't know that yet. Once we discover that, you would expect that Alonso would probably feature amongst their contingency plans. The same applies to Liverpool, obviously. That's an obvious link with Arne Slot kind of under a little bit of pressure at this moment in time. Enzo Maresca, I think, a brilliant manager. I think he was quite poorly treated, in my opinion, at Chelsea. I think it's a difficult environment to navigate when you've got kind of that model where you're signing so many players and you've got to manage other aspects of the club in the sense of protecting the interests of the club's model. I mean, some of the way some of the players were treated, the likes of, off the top of my head, Raheem Sterling sort of became outcasts, and you're working with such an inflated squad that actually it can be quite hard to yield results. But you've done a great job, and obviously sacked Liam Rossini is not doing too bad now. But I still think Enzo Maresca has got that little bit of magic that I like. The football isn't particularly easy on the eye at times, though. That's the other issue. I think it's important for any manager coming into Spurs that plays attractive football, front foot football. That's something that the fans really love and warm towards. So that would be my only concern there. And I think another wild card option that's worth throwing into the mix is Cesc Fabregas. I mean, would he leave Como for Spurs given that he's played for Arsenal and Chelsea? I don't know.
And he's a part owner in Como as well, isn't he?
Yes, exactly. So it's a little bit complicated, but I think he's done a terrific job. Yeah. No doubt about that. There's a few other names around Europe. Sebastian Hoeneß at Stuttgart has persistently had a really good track record over the past couple of years. Trying to think what other ones there are, but yeah, I mean that's the kind of route I'd go down. I do have concerns about Glasner. I've said it before that I think when you're entrusted to have possession and dominate the ball, I don't think he's the kind of best coach. I think his team is sometimes better equipped to counter-attacking and sort of sitting back and exploding on the break. Also, an interesting element that I found out today was that Christian Purslow was talking to Henry Winter on Henry's podcast, and he said that when he was at Villa, he went to Frankfurt to interview Oliver Glasner, and he really impressed just before they appointed Emery. And Johan Lange was actually with him for that interview. So if Johan is obviously, staying and it's going to be an integral part of this process, from what he was saying, Christian Purslow, it sounds like Glasner was very highly regarded because of his preparation for that interview. And actually, apparently, he was housing in a very small flat, which only had the basics, sort of a fridge, a TV and a bed. And they really kind of warmed to the fact that he was just so crazy about football that he was willing to live in this kind of environment. So a nice little story there. But I do think Glasner will probably be in the conversation, although he wouldn't be near my top picks. What about you, Ali?
Yeah, I've actually just remembered other potential interims, although I don't know if it'd be too big a jump, but very highly rated within Spurs is Stuart Lewis. as a real up-and-coming coach. Obviously, maybe mainly under-18s coach over recent years till Thomas Frank gave him this pathway role, coaching the young players in the first team and bringing them through. There's him and Wayne Burnett, obviously under-21s manager, who have both done a really good job over the years, but I just wonder whether that would be considered a bit of a gamble or not. And again, do the players respect an under-18s coach coming up? I don't know. It's a shame because I do think he's going to be the next one off the production line in terms of coaches, Stuart Lewis. Long term, I think Glasner sounds great, but I think the fans would not like the football long term.
Definitely.
I think it would be another one that would fall into that category. Same with Maresca. Alonso, I think, probably is a bit of a pipe dream in terms of, I think there's just bigger fish for him to bite into, whatever way you want to take it. I think, obviously, the looming name over everything is Mauricio Pochettino. And he, I talk about former managers making it very clear they'd love to come back to Spurs. He's doing the same. And if I'm Thomas Frank, I'm probably thinking this week, cheers, Poch. That was absolutely horrendous timing. And yeah, I mean, technically, Ange, I don't know, he could, although if Thomas Frank had stayed, it probably would have been because they'd won, so it would have been less awkward circumstances, I guess. But yeah, Pochettino, I think, is in one sense, the easy win for the board. If you know you want to get the majority of the fans back on side, you go back to the person that's had the most sustained success in terms of league position over the years, and that would be Pochettino. 3 top 3 finishes in a row, then finished 4th and got to a Champions League final. I've said this before to other journalists and probably you as well, the first week would be incredible. The first week, Poch back at Tottenham would be the most romantic, kind of emotional football thing you could get, because it would just be great. And he would be so happy to be back. It's a club that, he and Jesus Perez said in the podcast, the High Performance podcast the other day, it's just one they're never going to shake that special connection with. They just love it. No Daniel Levy, obviously, if they were to return, but a higher wage budget and the promise of money to spend. So potentially a different version of Tottenham Hotspur for him. So that my heart says I would love to see that, because I think there's always been that what if with Poch. Some fans, I think, never didn't like him towards the end and never felt that he was going to ever win a trophy. Some felt that, as in his own expression, he was never given the furniture to put in the house. I would probably love to see Romero under Pochettino as a manager. I think that would be, a former Argentina defender. I think that would be a brilliant combo. And I think he would probably have his respect as well. And, the manager who managed Alderweireld and Vertonghen as a centre-back partnership, I think gets the ultimate out of Romero and Van der Ven. So, and the young players, let's be honest, that was something he was good at. He was so good at bringing young players through. So I think that side of it, I think it would be very exciting. The downside to me is the potential date of, if they were to go for him, when he could come in. And, he could be with the USA into July, and even if he's there for the early stages of the World Cup, let's say, you've still missed the entire period of planning for a new season, the transfer window and everything. And people kind of downplay that a little bit, like, I'm sure he can do a little bit of work. It's huge at a World Cup, and it's huge setting up a new season for a club. It is so involved, and you can't
it's
really
also
do
the fact, Ali, that it's such a big summer for Spurs, isn't it? It needs the full attention.
It's another rebuild. It's another one, isn't it? It's crazy. So yeah, that I feel kind of counts against him. And I mean, there's other ones, aren't there, as well? There's Nagelsmann, Tuchel. There's other kind of World Cup managers that potentially you'd think maybe come into the mix as well. But yeah, Pochettino is the easy win. He's the one, a little bit like way back with Levy, funnily enough, when George Graham went and he brought in Hoddle, who was the popular choice. Everyone wanted the former Spurs legend back in the fold. And I think Pochettino would do that with probably 85% of the fan base would absolutely love it. But I just wonder, timing-wise, Whether it ends up being a bit of a problem in him being an actual candidate for it or not, we'll find out. But I just this is so difficult because Spurs don't want to get relegated. They want to make a decision that isn't a gamble, and they don't want to get relegated. But I also worry that the relegation threat makes them panic. And I think the worst possible thing right now would be to go for a permanent manager. It's a little bit like the whole argument for the January window. We've got to get someone at short term, but also long term. We've got to make calm, intelligent decisions and all this sort of stuff. The same goes for the next manager. I would not just lump on anyone that happens to be available now just because you might keep you up, and then you're stuck with a manager that is another mess and ends up going in a year's time or 2 years' time at the most. I think they've got to get this right. And if that means an interim, a safe pair of hands, then do it, because I don't think Spurs need a lot of points to stay up. Really, I think they've just got to kind of get their act together. And I think naturally the talent in this team will bring them points. But it's I'm fascinated to see who comes next. And there are a few choices out there.
Certainly, and you've got a couple of days off towards the end of the week, haven't you?
Don't say that. It'll happen then.
I know. Well, that's usually the direction of travel. But I just feel like with Poch, just before we go, it really is sort of like going back to an ex that until you actually try it, you're never going to know how, because it is going to go one or two ways.
Why does that sound like personal experience?
No. I just think the charm and the temptation is there to definitely. Yeah. It needs to happen. You're right, 100%. I agree with what you say, that like the first week would just be exceptional, and it's the real easy win, the mood lifter, and just the intrigue. Just he gets Spurs and what it means to be Spurs, and all the managers that have followed him haven't been able to achieve what he did in terms of consistency. So I think it's just frustrating that the stars don't quite align this summer, and I think that is ultimately what might prevent it. I think it will happen, but I do have large doubts as to whether it will happen this summer. I do actually think.
I was going to say, I wonder if Iraola is the Pochettino clone in a way. I wonder if they think we can't get Poch, it doesn't work, but Iraola is the closest we're going to get while also being on our original list. Yeah,
I think the only thing with Iraola that sort of puts me off a little bit is just he's a very softly spoken guy and he's an incredible tactician, but I just don't think he's quite got the charisma required to sort of change. It's got to be a drastic change of the club's fortunes, and you have to be quite a sort of authoritative manager. And I just think tactically, absolutely spot on. But at Bournemouth, again, it's a bit like Thomas Frank. It's all nicey. He's got an infrastructure that's built around him. The recruitment is exceptional. I mean, Spurs' recruitment has been so bad that actually that needs to drastically change as well. So it's going to be so interesting. I think, I don't know which way it's going to go. I just think at this moment in time, we've got to kind of sit tight, and over the next week or so, we should get a bit more of an indication of what's out there.
If they could do it before Friday, Saturday or Sunday, that'd be awesome, please.
Yes. You never know. It might be you and George Sessions as interim bosses for the Arsenal game.
Do you know, talking of George, that's just reminded me. George has had this theory that he thinks one day, he's been pushing it now, which I think is a little bit early, about Ben Davies becoming a caretaker manager at some point.
It's a great shout.
Yeah, it's very early. I think he's only got his A license, so I think it would be very, very early for him. But, I think the players would play for him.
Yeah.
But I think, who knows that could end up being right in the next few days. The limping Ben Davies with his poor knee. But yeah, definitely down the line. I think there's no question. There's a few kind of coming through the ranks now. There's him. Jan Vertonghen, I think, wants to be like a sporting director type, doesn't he? I think he wants to be even higher. You could end up with having Ben Davies as the boss, Jan Vertonghen as a sporting director in the future, and
Defoe's pushing as well, but he's not quite had that breakthrough yet.
Robbie Keane as well.
Said. And also, Michael Carrick's another one that we can't underestimate, because if he doesn't get the Manchester United job in the summer, will Spurs maybe look at him as a one they will at least talk to? I think, that's realistic to suggest that's the case.
That's the thing, isn't it? It hadn't worked for him at Middlesbrough eventually.
Yeah.
Obviously, had some terrific times early on. He's almost revitalised his entire CV with what he's done at Man U. I agree, and I think pretty sure he'd be someone that Spurs would have looked at as a potential interim as well, and probably absolutely gutted when United made the decision first. Oh, there is Amorim, isn't there? Don't forget him.
Mate, that opinion has fallen off a cliff in recent weeks. I think Carrick's actually exposed how bad Amorim was, but I don't know. I think just to go back to that very quickly, I mean, at Sporting, you looked at Amorim as a manager that actually would appeal to most clubs, really. I think he was actually linked with Manchester City, which seems madness now. But again, it's so hard to translate these ideas into the Premier League. You look at some of these foreign coaches and you think, oh, he's brilliant. He's got so-and-so top of the Belgian league or the Portuguese league. And it just never quite translates into the Premier League. So maybe a Prem-proven manager is the route to go down. But we'll have to wait and see. Ali, talk us through the week because obviously... Well, talk us through the build-up to the Arsenal game because I suppose there's no press conferences and actually you're going to have a little bit of time to try and work on some of the background stuff that's going on behind the scenes.
Well, that's it because it's the FA Cup weekend and unfortunately, as we know, Spurs are not in the FA Cup. It's a weekend off, which is why I also got the weekend off and Friday off, which is very helpful as Valentine's Day is also my wedding anniversary so that I didn't have to remember 2 dates in a year. It's very, very simple and easy. So that's why I'm hoping nothing happens then. But players, like I say, have got, I think it's 5 days off. So they get that good rest. Spurs hopefully get themselves in order in what they're going to do going forward for the rest of the season. Lovely if it was Thursday. If not, Monday, please. That would be terrific. And then we'll have a press conference, which would normally be... When's the game? Saturday or Sunday? It's gone out of my head.
Sunday, I believe.
Okay, so the press conference would have been Friday anyway for that game. Yeah, it is Sunday. So, yeah, whoever it is will be speaking to us for the first time on what is... Crikey, is it the 20th, isn't it? Where's time gone? Yeah, and that will be the next kind of date in our diary. And it depends what it is. If it's interim, then the coaching staff kind of is probably going to be a mishmash of what's there already and maybe former types coming in or whoever that interim has worked with. If it's a new person, then probably all bets are off and it all starts again and you have a full-time one, then everything changes. So, yeah, that's pretty much what our next week or so is going to be, you and me, both chasing up leads, talking to various people on all sides, inside the club, outside the club, trying to work out who's coming through the door. By the time this even gets published, goes online, this pod, they might have got a little bit further down the line. That's how quickly these things can happen. But like I said, if I'm Tottenham, take your time. Take your time and think about it over these next 5 days before the players come back and make sure you pick the right person because can't gamble and either A, get yourself relegated or B, get stuck with a manager who is not going to be your long-term manager, but you've given him another 3 to 5 year deal. So yeah, huge week ahead.
Huge week ahead. And I'm sure next time we speak, there'll be lots more to discuss, Ali. You can keep up to date with all the latest Spurs news on the football.london website. And to get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, please go to nordvpn.com/talkingtottenham. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and the link is in the podcast episode description box below.